Everyone, I call this meeting to order at 6:32 p.m. It's our special meeting. Alessandra, would you please take roll call?
Mrs. Cantwell? Here. Mrs. BoE? Here. Ms. Franklin? Here. Mrs. Kelleher?
Here.
Mrs. Langerson? Here. Mrs. Post? Here. Mrs. Russ?
Here.
Mr. Schuman?
Here.
Mr. Zabrowski?
Here.
Would you like me to introduce the town members that are here?
Sure, you can add them to the roll call, yes.
We have Paula Luna and James Dimitriadis.
Okay, thank you. All right, next is the approval of our agenda. Additions, deletions, we don't have any because it's a special agenda. Is there a motion to approve the agenda as it is? Dipti, second by Catherine, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries. Agenda is approved. Under new business tonight, we have action item A, and that's approval of the updated CMS building specs, which you should all have a copy of in front of you. We do have from our building committee, our chairperson, Rosanna Glynn, here tonight. If you could also actually add her to the roll call, please. And so we've previously approved these ed specs, but there were some changes made, and we'll have to also look through them tonight and see if we are wanting to approve them so that we can move forward. And there are changes, although I think our copy is not highlighted. So do you want to go through the changes, or do you want to call up Rosanna? How do you want to do this?
I think having Rosanna go through it would be a good idea. I just want to remind the board, these, as we go along, we have our building committee meetings, other things come up, and Rosanna could talk about that. People from the public are speaking and they're making recommendations, and then we're looking into them. And I think it's really important for everyone to know that even if the recommendation is made, we want to make sure it's part of the ed spec, whether we decide that we could afford it as a town or not afford it. But we have to be mindful, and sometimes it's, I'm preaching to the choir because those of us that are sitting here understand, we have to be mindful that when we make recommendations to either add or change something, there are certain things that are reimbursable at the rate at which Rosanna will explain, and then other things that will not be reimbursable by the state. So it's something that we will have to then move forward and go to town council and Board of Finance to get an approval for, and then most likely a referendum to get an approval from. There is not, there is a formula that we use, but 83,313 square feet of this building is reimbursable because that's the formula for the amount of students that we're allowed through state grant. Anything above that is not reimbursable. So we're going to talk about some of the things that we all want everything, right? I'll be the first one to say it. I'm your superintendent. I want everything for our kids. Everyone knows I don't live here. I'm not a taxpayer here. I pay a lot of taxes in the next town over, and I have a lot of this stuff. And it's tough. You have to make a big decision. Our decision really is to look at what the school programmatically needs. And then it's the town's decision to make that decision if they want that or they don't want that. What we're doing and what I'm going to tell you, and what Rosanna's going to share with you, is what do the kids need, but then what have community members come out and spoken out about as a community that they would like to see. That doesn't mean we say 100% we have to have it. That doesn't mean 100% we don't have to have it. It's really up to all of you who live here. It's up to the town council. It's up to the referendum at the end of the day. So I think it's really important to know that if we change the ed specs to say one thing or another, there's one big area of, I don't know if you want, it's Karen, she's like, that we're going to talk about and make a decision. That doesn't mean because the board said, yes, we're going to do this, we're going to look into it, it's going to happen. It possibly can change, and everything can change right up until the last minute until we submit our grant. So I think it's important to know that. We may be back here again and say, hey, we included this in the ed specs. The problem is that if it's not included in the ed specs, then the chances are we'll have a harder time getting reimbursed. And the state, obviously, you all know, is in an upheaval in this department, so we want to make sure we get it right. that doesn't mean that things are not going to change as we go along. We're going to have to look at this quite a few times, and we're definitely going to have to look at it as we write the grant and submit the grant in June if we get that far. Once the grant is submitted, then it gets a little bit stickier, so we want to make sure that we do a really good job. But we still have time to make changes and talk. And as a matter of fact, I spoke with the town manager and said it would be a really great idea if we can have Marian Sylvester, the director of finance, come and explain. So if you, us, we, the town, all of us, add an extra 1,000 square feet, right? And it's not reimbursable. What does that mean? The town will be on the hook for, and then how does that play out over a 10-year period, a 20-year period, a 30-year period, so that you have more knowledge, and meaning the building committee. And most of you, so many of you, and I'm so thankful, you really are. You're going above and beyond, and you're coming to all these meetings. But we have to keep that in mind too, as we make these decisions. We want everything. I want everything. Of course, I'm going to be the first one to say I want everything for our kids. But I think we also have to be very mindful about what is affordable and what the town is willing to support. And then at the end of the day, it's up to the people that live here to make that decision, which includes all of you. So I just want to start off with that before Rosanna gets into the weeds about some of the changes. And then she could just give you an update about everything else. So Rosanna, if you want to take over, feel free.
Do you mind coming up to the podium so
Is Karen on?
that you can be live streamed?
Oh, okay.
But she said we can call the questions.
All right. So the last digital copy I have is from March 29th, but I believe there was another one submitted this week. Yeah, okay. But there are changes that I know of that went in. One of them was the number of classrooms. So we did an audit of the classroom quantity to make sure that it matched. So 34 total, and that's right. We confirmed that.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Let me pick up my email. I should have done this before. So there were a lot of little things when the building committee went to go visit Colchester. We noted a couple of things that we liked. Let me find my email. Sorry, I had it up and then I closed it.
So as we go through this process, the building committee is visiting schools. So we were able to visit Colchester Middle School. And of course, like I had said, you don't know what you don't know until you go around and start visiting of things that are not in our schools, or that would be really nice to have in our schools. Is it a need? Is it a want? Will it support the program? Is it something? The nice thing that we noticed is they have a room that is just for coding. That was built and planned for over 6-7 years ago now. That's not needed because it's integrated, interdisciplinary. So you don't need a separate room for that. So that's a cost savings that a lot of schools that started doing STEAM or STEM over the last few years have a coding. And we realize we don't need a coding room because it's integrated into the robotics, and the kids have everything right in front of them now, which wasn't so back then. So that's just something that we noticed. That's an expense. That was a pretty big expense that we don't need to have.
Okay. All right. So one of the things we had asked about was teacher microphone systems for accessibility. That's already included.
Yes.
So
So that's included.
That's included. Practice rooms for the band. There are 2 practice rooms that he was able to wheedle in there, 50 square feet each.
Yep.
So that should be in that spec now. We had asked about, so in the, what's that class called?
Intervention?
No, where the students learn how to cook, but not
Oh,
the home
culinary
ec,
arts.
not the home ec one for, the special needs, what's it called? The life skills. Thank you. My brain was not working right there. So for life skills, we had asked about washer dryer in addition, and Roger stated that you basically get an allowance for all of that. So as long as it fits within the allowance, you can put whatever you want in there for the most part. And then cafeteria storage, we opted not to pursue that any further because it would take away square footage from other areas. So the tables do fold up. You just put them against the wall, and that should just be good enough. And then we did add outdoor seating for the cafeteria. We want to make sure that was included. They should have also included netting and fencing for the soccer field, as well as the dimensions of the soccer field. That should be in there somewhere.
Yep.
Probably under outdoor or something. Okay. So while you're looking at that, the other big point of discussion is the auditorium. So for the building committee meeting later, we do have a before and after comparison of what the current stage and auditorium sizing is in the middle school versus what we're going to with the ed spec. The biggest difference right now is that the stage currently at the middle school is 1,300 square feet, and the proposed one in the ed spec is 900 square feet. The reason why it's 900 square feet is twofold. One is that you're trying to still stay within that 83,000 square foot allowance. And secondly, anytime the stage goes beyond 1,000 square feet, it requires additional infrastructure support. So if we wanted to have a stage that was similar in size to the current stage, it would cost us somewhere between $300,000 and $400,000 extra that would not be reimbursed by the state. So why do we need a larger stage? Well, if you talk to teachers and performers today, they would claim that the current middle school stage is small, just as is. So going smaller seems rather ludicrous, in my opinion. That's just my opinion. So that's something that the building committee is going to talk about. Does it have to be in the ed spec today? I would say no. That could be something that we discuss or vote on later, but I would say before we go to the town for any kind of vote, we definitely need to figure that out. So the building committee today is going to be talking at length about it. The larger stage. The auditorium itself is going to be slightly smaller. So I don't remember the exact numbers, but I think the current square footage of the auditorium, I want to say, is 3,700 square feet, and we're going to, I say, 35-ish hundred square feet. So you could potentially lose about 100 seats in that space. The ed spec has a minimum requirement of 250 seats. The current auditorium has 490 seats, I believe. Our desire was to have 500 seats so that we can fit the entire school population, as well as some teachers can actually sit as opposed to having to stand during these sessions that they have. So again, if we wanted to expand on the actual auditorium size, we would have to go and exceed that 8,300 square foot, 83,000 square foot limit that we have based on the state's standards, and that would just come out of the town. The town would have to pay for that. So why is the auditorium so important? It is a central focus. It's a community area, and our community citizens as well as businesses utilize it, as well as the student population. So it's not just for the students; it's for the whole community. And if you're $10 building, to skimp on the one main focus of the building, one of the main focuses of the building just seems a little short-sighted, in my opinion. All my with the building committee, and again, I think the biggest deterrent is cost. That's pretty much the only reason why you wouldn't want to go down that path. As far as space is concerned, we have plenty of space for it. The auditorium would be situated in the front of the building. And yeah, 35, thank you. So that you could extend it out if you had to. The front side of the auditorium, or the back side of the stage, I should say, would amphitheater, which is really nice. So you can have outdoor shows or events, and you'd have access to the back end of the stage, which I think is pretty cool. And that is already included in that spec. That was the other thing we had to change, is moving the amphitheater outdoors.
Yes.
Okay. So with the current layout, we do have storage of 600 square feet, which today we only have 250 square feet. So one of the biggest complaints was that we don't have enough storage with the current stage. So you're going to have plenty of storage now with the new setup. We do have the layout was provided, but we don't have the prints for this meeting. So it looks similar. It's just that the stage is going to become much more narrow. So that extra 400 square feet that you lose with the new design actually comes off the side wings, as opposed to like the depth. So that is what we're going to be discussing. It's not going to change that spec today. And in reality, it really doesn't impact, the grant paperwork, I should call it, but it does impact what we go to referendum with or town vote with.
Do you want to tell? So that in the ed specs, I'm sorry, it's on page 6. Oh my God, I have to make sure. 18. If you look at page 18, so we had 5 different options, right? It was leave it as is. So it's important for everyone to know the history. You know it better than I do. It used to be a high school. The middle school used to be high school. So it was built with a larger square footage for the auditorium, the gymnasium, and the stage. Since then, and many iterations of it, and it could change by next year. We don't know as far as what the state says is reimbursable and not reimbursable. The stage and the auditorium for reimbursement for high schools is a bigger space. In middle school, it's not. So if we're building from scratch, and that's what the committee voted on to build another building, you're now going to be building a smaller stage and a smaller auditorium, because that's what is typical for a middle school. What we have now is not typical. That doesn't mean we don't use it and put it to really good use. We do, and we still feel in a lot of ways that it's too small. However, when we're talking about funding and reimbursable, being reimbursable, you're not getting reimbursed for that space if we were to add extra square footage. So then we talked about, if you look at that page, we're talking about a 950 square foot stage, which is smaller, 400 square feet smaller than what we have right now at the middle school. If you're taking that storage space, which is 600 square feet, you can add that, but then you lose storage space. And honestly, we cannot afford, school after school, you need space to store things. And we make those mistakes quite often. Can we do that and pretend that we're going to have somewhere to store the students, for plays and for band and for everything else? Yes, but it's not realistic. So that was another option that we talked about, which I don't believe is a good option, but really that's up to the building committee, and it's up for grabs.
Dr. McCready, what I'm hearing is it sounds like we don't necessarily have to make the decision tonight on
Well,
that. So should we move to some questions? Or
And you do, and you should vote on this ed spec as is right
Right.
now. And or you could change it. You could vote to amend it, to leave it as is and stay with the 950 square foot. That's going to be smaller, and keep the square footage of the storage space as is, which is the way we had this written. I have a neutral opinion I understand that it would cost money to the town. I also understand it would be really nice to have a bigger stage. So it really is up to all of you and the building committee and the town to make that decision. But you would be moving forward with these ed specs if you voted on these ed specs. We do need voted on ed specs at all times so that the architect couldn't make tweaks. If we don't have voted upon specs, you can't make tweaks.
So in looking
So-
at the timeline, though, it looks like the building committee cost approval is on April 20th. So would that tweak have to happen before the
Before,
20th?
right.
Which,
So we'd have to
that's
call
spring
another-
break, so I'm
Oh,
just.
no, I'm sorry. We could make tweaks. We could make tweaks
much.
right up until we submit the grant. The town council could come back and say, we don't love this idea. We want that, we want, that conversation can continue to happen. We may have to make tweaks, depending on other
Okay.
constituents and
So
what
the
they have
final
to say.
cost isn't final until the
No,
referendum.
this isn't, no, this can be changed. The big stuff, and this is a big thing, so we have to make a decision. This is a big expense, it's a big thing, the town has to want it, everyone has to be kind of almost on the same page. But you can vote on it as it is, and then we could amend, or you could amend it. Right now, you could say, we want to go with the bigger, and we want to make that amendment, and we want to vote on that. I am not here to steer you one way or another. Rosana's the building committee chair, so I'll allow her to do that. I just want to make sure you have all the facts.
Okay. All right, and with that, let's open it up for questions. Matt, I saw your hand up.
Of course you did. So here's the question, right? I'm fully on board with programming for the arts. I'm a big supporter of theater and all that. Is there another auditorium in the district that's a larger size and could be used for some of those larger performances?
For performances, yes, but for practice, no. So like if our band today would not be able to fit on the stage as it is. So if they wanted to practice prior to a performance, they'd have to trek all the way over to the high school every time they would want to do it, which seems ridiculous. And then you're battling with the high school because the high school has
Right,
their
because
own
then you've got scheduling,
right.
right?
Yeah,
So
huge
and-
scheduling issues.
all right, I'm just trying to kind of.
How we do it now. We could have Ms. Coach come up and tell you how does it work right now with the size of the stage? So how does?
Well, because what I'm hearing is, it sounds like ideally we build a stage that's either slightly bigger than we have, or at least what we have now. I'm also hearing that that's going to cost between $300,000 and $400,000 more in the end, and that won't be reimbursable.
It is reimbursable, but it's a much different reimbursable rate. And
So instead of 39%, it might be more like 10. We
it all
don't know.
depends. Yeah, right. Very, very minimum. Very minimum. We could possibly. They've given waivers before, but I want the town to know that we're taking a risk. We're not going into this thinking we're going to get that 39% reimbursable rate. If we did, it would be great and it'd be a miracle.
Right.
But we have to go in thinking that they're not going to be giving us that reimbursable rate, and the town,
So we really, we'd have to be prepared to say, we're going to pay for this.
we have to be prepared to say that if-
Absolutely.
right, exactly. So
And
Ms.
it's not
Coach-
considering the auditorium expanding that. That price was just for the stage itself, not
that
the
was
auditorium.
just for the stage.
So I want to make sure I heard things properly. What's the current seating we have currently? How many seats do we have in the auditorium?
We have currently 400.
And the ed specs have this going to
250,
250?
which would be very small. Even now, when we have whole school assemblies,
it's got to be
used to have the whole school together for whether it was our Veterans Day assembly or we had somebody come in, we could get all the kids in there, but all the teachers have to stand. So in that regard, we don't have really enough capacity for the whole building if we want to do all school assemblies. At 250, I would have to break down by grade levels. We'd have to do multiple assemblies. It wouldn't be an opportunity for us to be together. We also have a very robust drama program, and this year's I've had over 100 kids participate. This year, because of COVID, and we were still trying to, keep things as well contained as possible, we only had 35. So it's just it was a whole different atmosphere. Still fabulous, but, just not as much kids that we brought on as we've done in the past. 50, our drama program would be really, it'd be a tough thing
and it's
to
also
do.
limiting because there are some assemblies I assume that you do where you're paying speakers to come in.
Correct.
And if you pay them to come in for an hour and talk to all the students, that's less than paying them to come in for 3.5 hours to allow for transition time between grade levels and so forth. So it actually does
cost.
lead to some
And
other
cost.
issues down the line, right? Yeah.
Right.
I'm just trying to make sure I understand before we kind of go down this road. What I'm hearing is, and correct me if I'm wrong, ideally, we have a big stage, 500 seats roughly in an auditorium. But if we do that, we're likely going to pay for it out of pocket. And we run the risk of paying for all of it out of pocket, at the very least, not getting reimbursed at the same rate we're getting reimbursed for the rest of the building. Is that fair for me to say?
Yes, and the auditorium is sized to fit more seating. I think the latest one was 450.
But that's a smaller stage
No,
With a
no.
smaller space, yeah.
It's a smaller stage.
and
You
less
get
storage.
reimbursed for,
Half the population.
population.
So half of 495, 245 is what you'd get reimbursed for. So any permanent seating above that, you don't get reimbursed for.
So can you back up for just a moment? So the seating, we would have 400 plus seats, but we'd only be reimbursed for half of them in the current ed specs? Okay.
Well, right, because the ed spec just says
I just want to make sure we're not only having 250 seats
says
because our
maximum
shows sell
seating,
out.
but
so-
nothing less than 250. So
we're
anything.
on the hook. We're on the hook for it.
Okay.
And there's also, remember, there's FFEs too, so furniture, whatever, and fixtures and. what's the-
Right.
Yeah, well, that is another, it's how, we have a certain amount of money allocated for that. So we have to be smart and say, well, if we want those chairs, then we can't have this.
Well, and the other question is, if we go with a bigger stage, knowing that it's more expensive, but there is value to the community, I would argue, right? The other side of that coin is, does that also mean that we're going to spend a lot more on AV because we have to now increase the number of speakers we have and the lighting and the way that works, and so it's not. I'm thinking of it as not just seats and a stage, but there's other items that
Yeah,
can come into
that's
play there.
inclusive in that price, which is why
Okay.
they're saying anywhere between $300,000 and $400,000.
So that includes all that extra
includes
stuff as well.
everything that we would need to make that stage
Yep.
function.
Okay. All right. I mean,
It's a lot of like
Okay,
fire
I think we have a question.
retention stuff that.
I'm sorry.
are that.
I was
think
just going
Lori
to
has
say
a
thank you
question.
for your
Can-
help.
No, it's a lot.
Lori, go ahead.
I have two questions. So,
That's
what
so
is
different.
the size of our high school stage? Do you know what that is? Just trying to get an idea. Do we know? Or
Never got a reply. Oh, Mr. Sinclair is still working on that.
okay. So another, I'm just thinking, why is that the number for the middle schools? Like, doesn't every district face this issue then? Where did they come up with this number that it's so limiting? Other towns must have been confronted with the same issue, right? Nobody wants to build smaller, so do we know why it's
There's a formula, just like with everything else, and we stick to that formula depending on the school. So it's different for elementary versus middle versus high school. It's a complicated decision. A lot of districts are faced with this. Some districts towns choose that they're going to fund so that they can have larger areas, and a lot don't. They say this is it, and this is what we have, and you go without. You have to look at the risk versus the benefit. That's what the town has to really look at. What's more important? Unfortunately, as elected officials, you get to make those fun decisions, and then the town, will speak for themselves. But it is very common for districts to stay within the reimbursable square footage that is given. Once in a while, people go outside the box and say, this is important enough that we as taxpayers or we are willing to take on extra because it's important to the community. But going into it, I just want everybody to know the truth, is that if we're going into this is how we're going into it. And is there a risk, right? Is there a risk? You have to look at the risk of, is the town going to say, we don't need this, huge, or some people who live in the town, I say the town, people who live here, we don't need all this and don't necessarily understand why we would need such a large stage and don't work in a school every day and see all of that. of course, we see the benefit of increasing our students' opportunities for the arts and everything else. And again, I'm preaching to the choir. I'm sure all of you do as well. Those are the things that you have to think about. There is no guarantee though, and the formula is take the auditorium, split it in half. That's how many kids something like that, right? Then you're reimbursed for half of that or something. It's a very low percentage above and beyond, and it's standard for all of us based on the number that we would go on, and the number that we would go on for enrollment is 492 students.
And just one more. So how many seats are in the current high school auditorium? Do we know that?
The high school, I don't know.
Just trying to
It's
see.
definitely bigger than the middle
Tommy, do
school.
you know? Yeah.
I think it's definitely bigger than the middle school.
You could fit the entire school in there.
Yeah.
So
It's
about
definitely
500.
Definitely bigger than the middle school.
We can ask.
It's
Sorry,
not
I've
bigger?
heard that the seating is not bigger at the high school than the middle school, but I could be wrong.
I think there's more seating available at the high
But
school.
the
I
stage
don't
is
know
definitely bigger. at
The stage is definitely bigger. Yeah. Yeah, Tommy, can you look?
Right.
Okay.
Oh yeah.
Dip, do you have a
He's having a
question?
problem with his knee.
So I do have a question. I guess I'm confused. So the middle school stage is based on our enrollment. And it's not the universal, like you said, 950 square feet is just for a district's enrollment. So a
Based
town
on-
bigger than ours would have more square feet.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Which is kind of crazy, right? Because if you're doing a performance, you're still, but that's how the state works. We never say that the state makes 100% sense.
It gives
in
an
ways
edge
that
to
they
the
reimburse.
towns that are larger, for sure, with their programs and our
Connecticut does a
programs.
lot of things different than the other states when it comes to
Jen.
these buildings.
I was just wondering, other than the drama club, the music program, you mentioned maybe that outside community uses that space as well. So who uses it? Are they charged a fee to use that space?
Yep. So like, was it something in dance for them?
Company and
Company
Tempo.
and Tempo. They'll like come in, and then they do get charged at an hourly rate, like $100 an hour plus custodial fees, whatever it is. So
There was a local group too. I don't know if they're still together, but there was some other local group in town.
And it's.
yeah, there is another theater group. There's a theater group in town. Yes.
I don't know if they used that stage or the high school stage.
And a lot of times, in all honesty,
Okay.
it's a community building, they're community events, like this is a private company, right? So we, of course, we charge them a rate to use it. But if it's a community-based organization, we charge them for the custodial fees, and sometimes we waive the building fees. It's part of the community, our kids are involved, it's the right thing to do. I don't want you to think that we're gonna make tons of money off of this. There isn't going to be like, a revenue.
Right.
Just for commercial companies.
James is
to use it.
James is agreeing. Do you know about this group or what it's called? Do you mind just chiming in if you have any information?
The Cromwell Community Theater, it has used the high school, and we're going to be using the high school again in the fall this year, but having more performance spaces available would allow for more flexibility. So, for example, for this year, the Cromwell Community Theater wanted to do a project of the Laramie Project, and we're going to be doing it in the fall. We initially wanted to do it in October, but after going through the dates that the high school auditorium is already booked, now we're doing it the second weekend of September. And that's just showing how booked the high school stage is. If there are more opportunities, they'd be able to do it at different times. And in the past, they've done 2 cabarets and 2 full musicals. The musicals had, I think, 50 people in the cast each, and used the high school. But, the more options and availability that the community theater would have, the more programming that they can put on. And I know, when I was in Cromwell schools, when I graduated in 2011, our all-school production had 12 people in it. And now the all-school productions are much bigger. And when I was in middle school, there was no all-school production. And now we have a middle school music program that is built up by parents and community members that really care about it. So I know that it's growing, and there's more use than there was 10 years ago.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Were you going to add something, Catherine?
Oh,
Hi,
sure.
Selena. Mr. Sinclair was on the stage, so I was able to wrestle him down to the stage and get the answers. Current stage here is 1222. Current capacity is 485.
So very similar. Little,
Well,
the
because
stage is a little smaller.
Because it used to be a high school, so
Yep,
that's why we have that number over at the middle school.
right.
So it programmatically, I mean, as you can tell, am I doing a good job trying to be neutral? Programmatically, and you know what our kids would gain and what our community could gain. There's a lot to gain, but that's up to the community to weigh, you know, the risks versus, like Councilman Dimitriadis said, the program has grown and the arts is growing, and part of my interview question 3 years ago was, how are you going to continue to grow the arts program? We can do it, and our kids are very interested in it, and they love it, and it's the A in STEAM, but I want to make sure that you have all the facts of what this is going to entail before any decision is made.
All right, I believe Catherine has a question.
So I have a hard time visualizing the shrinkage in 1,300. We lose 400 square feet, correct, of stage, about 350, 400?
400 about.
Ish. So I know we have had, one of my kids was in that production that had like 100 students, and I'm sorry you weren't here when what's his name, Mr. Sullivan started the programming. It was all inclusive, and Mr. Borgeson's continuing it. Unfortunately, it was a victim of COVID, but a lot of intermediate school kids, WIS and ECS kids went through. The play took in kids from every genre, every walk of life. And if we had to cut kids because of a stage size, our programs and our productions have outdone, at the middle school, have outdone high schools. So they've been outstanding. I don't like spending extra money like this and saying we're not going to get reimbursed. This is a lot of money. But I do know that the volume of what it's done, we have issues of kids. There's the sports kids, there's these kids, and they've all come together to be different parts of the play. We were so blessed that the middle school currently can hold that capacity, and I believe that Mr. Borgeson's going to bring it back because he's incredible. He's so good at what he does. But I just want people to be aware that no one's turned away from this program. Everyone plays a role, and if we cut our stage, I don't know if that's going to make us cut kids going forward because we can't fit them all on programs.
And just to add, about the cost, if you take $300,000 and if we had to pay the full amount, you're really looking at approximately $20 per year per household to pay for it over the course of the bond. Which for some people is a lot, but I think for some people, a 20-year bond.
You calculated that out? That's what it comes to?
Yep.
Okay.
Average.
Well,
Does anyone-
the big thing, I guess, is if we build it small and save the money, right, that solves the money issue. But does it then limit the use of the stage? Absolutely. And school buildings, yeah, they're under Board of Ed, but the whole community uses them.
Right.
So if we go smaller and save the money, which I'm all in favor of saving the money, we potentially now cut out entire sections of the community that would have
Exactly.
use to it. So there's either way there's going to be a loss. Either we're going to pay more for something that has more use to the community, or we're going to save the money and say to the community, sorry, fewer of you have access to this now.
Right.
So it's really kind of a difficult decision to look at. And I thank you and members of the building committee for trying to rifle all through this and then coming back and explaining it to us in terms that we can understand.
Right. And it is a focal point. Going to be one of the first spots they're going to see because the auditorium will have its own entrance area, not separate from the school, but kind of closed off from the rest of the schools. So they're going to see that. And
I really want to give this the attention it deserves, but I'm looking at the clock, and
Yeah.
I want to be conscious of everyone's time here tonight. So are there any other questions, or is anyone ready to move forward with a suggestion, a recommendation on what we have before us? Either recommending it as is, which is with the smaller stage, or we could amend the action to increase the size. Does anyone want to move forward with either of those options, or a different option? Sure.
if we vote on it like this, does that mean we're taking the option off the table to go with the bigger stage? Like you can't change it?
We could change it again.
We can change it?
Yeah, we could change it again.
Yeah, we could change it later on.
It just gives, you
It
always
adds
have to-
more work
Yeah.
because basically with this ed spec as is, it goes back to the architect and then we start the cycle of getting the financials figured out, going to the bond council, yada, yada, yada. If we change it after this point, then we have to start all over again and it could put everything at risk to getting this set for the referendum and for the grant proposal.
So what did the building committee, what was the consensus? Did you guys vote as to whether, what?
That's at 8
as a
o'clock.
They're meeting
recommendation?
tonight at 8, which is unfortunate. Did you have a question, Alan?
I'll make a motion. We proceed with a larger stage
Okay,
at
thank
this
you.
point in time.
Is there a second to that motion?
Second, do we need to specify how large?
You can, do you, the
Do-
1350, sorry, go ahead.
I was saying, do you want it to be similar to what we have today, the 1350?
So you're saying the high school is 1220, so it would actually be larger than the high school?
So 1350 is what we have today at the middle school. If you want to be similar to what the high school has, then it'd be 12.
20.
Was it 12 what?
It was 1222, and I neglected to put in Mr. Sinclair's last statement, which was
He wants it to be 5,000.
no, he said at least 1,300 if you're going to go for the middle school. So I would use 1,300 on the outside.
So I revised my motion to go 1,300 square foot.
Okay,
I'll second that.
okay. Any discussion? Okay, are we all in all in favor? Raise your hand. Opposed? Opposed? Okay. 50 being opposed. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4. You were for it? All right, 8 in favor, 8-1, motion passes. Okay. Thank you very much, Rosanna.
Thank you.
Okay, and our next item, I'm so sorry for the long delay, but without further ado, we do have our trainer here tonight. His name is Dustin James Rader. Do you go by Dusty or Dustin? You can let us know when you go. Dusty, okay. And he's from Genderly Speaking. We also have our town council members here to join us. We have Jack Hennahan, James Dimitriadis, and Paula Luna. So thank you for coming. Sorry for the delay, but I'm actually glad you were here for the building conversation.
That was fascinating. There you go. That was fascinating to listen to. I don't envy the decisions you guys have to make. I will briefly say that as a person who still does theater, thanks to the program at my high school, it's been an immensely positive impact on my life. So it's nice to hear that you guys really want to support the arts for your kids because it's so important. I also was a high school English teacher, and as an English teacher, I then also did the drama programs there as well. Again, just the way that kids get so excited when they get to do a program and, it's on this big stage and they've got the lights on them. I mean, it's an experience that none of them will ever forget. I'm going to just nudge myself a little bit more forward because I can't see my own slides from here. So today I'm talking about LGBTQ students. A little bit about me. I am transgender. I transitioned my senior year of high school, female to male. I have always been involved in education. I was a tutor while I was in high school. Like I said, I was an English teacher. I actually did my student teaching here at Cromwell High School, which is pretty cool to come back. Just a really quick story because I know that we're a little bit over on time, and I'm going to try to get you guys out of here by 8. I had a student, we were doing memoirs in class, and I was sitting over at one of the computers over there, actually, and a student came and sat down next to me, and the cord on her headphones came out of her phone, and it started playing this song called Take Me to Church by Hosier. Anybody familiar with that song? If you've seen the music video, it's very much about, the violence that is suffered in hate crimes against queer people. And so she, immediately turned it off and was like, oh, sorry. And I was like, no, I love that song. Have you seen the video? And she was like, yeah. And I was like, it's a really good video, right? And she was kind of like, yeah, it is. And I didn't think anything more of it until I got her memoir a couple of weeks later. And in it, she came out. And that was really powerful for me because I had to wonder if I hadn't had that brief interaction where I like openly said something about a pro-gay thing, would she have felt comfortable enough with me as her teacher, as her student teacher, not even her regular teacher, to come out, to say, you know, even though I, of course, wasn't telling anybody, you know, to be able to say that to a person who's going to understand and be empathetic is just so important. So I like to start out with a few statistics because I think it's important to realize that there are numbers here. The research has been done for you. 90% of transgender people report experiencing harassment, mistreatment, or discrimination on the job. Of course, that's talking about adults, but if it's happening to adults, you know it's happening to kids. 41% of transgender people have reported attempting suicide, compared to 1.6 of the general population, and the numbers rise as you get worse treatment. So if people are harassed during their job, that number jumps up, I think, 10%. If they're, you know, denied promotions, goes up 15-20%. I believe the highest percentage is about 61 for getting worse treatment. And then the two in the yellow at the bottom I really want to highlight because obviously this is the Board of Ed. We're talking about our students. Over 40% of LGBTQ plus students have seriously considered suicide. About 20% have attempted. I'm just going to let that sit for a second because that's, if you know 2 LGBTQ kids, at least one of them has seriously considered attempting suicide. And then, of course, 48% of LGBTQ youth reported using self-harm, including over 60% of trans and non-binary youth, which we're getting into those terms in a moment. I just want to point that out because these are real issues. These are not, you know, trivial things that sort of like, oh, they'll be fine if you say something about it. It really does affect these kids. The way that you treat them will affect how they view themselves and how they progress in life. And I think this is the most interesting statistic because it shows the other side of it. 78% of those who transitioned from one gender to the other reported that they felt more comfortable at work and their job performance improved despite high levels of mistreatment. And what that means is when you transition, you feel better about yourself because you get to be who you are. You're not trying to pretend to be somebody else. You're not constantly worrying, oh, is somebody going to find out who I am? Is somebody going to, you know, disrespect me because of this? You know that they might because everybody knows, but you still get to be who you are. You still get to live as your authentic self. We tell students all the time, you know, we want you to be yourself. We want you to be able to express yourself. We want you to feel comfortable and confident in who you are. Right? If our students leave and they don't feel good about themselves, we don't know if they're going to make it. We don't know where they're going to end up. But we do know that when our kids are loved, they succeed. So I want to talk about some trans terms. I added the ones on the side. I'm going to put them there just for now. You'll notice that they're under a pink umbrella because it's under the umbrella term, which is transgender. So the first one I'm going to go with is MTF versus FTM. It's pretty simple. It just stands for male to female or female to male. Transitioned instead of transgendered. Transgendered has sort of become an outdated word that people don't really use anymore. The verb form of what a transgender person does to go from one gender to another is transition. So I transitioned from female to male. I didn't transgender because transgender is an adjective. English teacher. Cisgender is basically what most people in this room are. Cisgender means that you're not transgender. You feel comfortable in the body that you were given at birth. Transgender versus transsexual versus transvestite. Transsexual and transvestite are not commonly used these days. Transgender is the big umbrella term. It basically encompasses anybody who doesn't really feel like they belong in the gender that they were assigned at birth. And again, we'll get into the categories over here. Transsexual is specifically somebody who has had medical operations, but it's sort of weird to talk about your medical operations with people you barely know. So most people don't use transsexual anymore, but that's where that's from. And then transvestite is somebody who dresses as a gender that is not their own. again, not super commonly in use because there are more terms now to use instead. Intersex, this is one I get a lot of questions about because most people think that it means hermaphrodite, somebody with both sex organs or something like that. And while that can be true, essentially intersex is just about having more than 2 chromosomes. So most of us have an XX chromosome or we have an XY chromosome. What a lot of us don't know is that you can have more than 2 chromosomes. It's very common. I believe about 5% of people are intersex, but most don't know it, because it doesn't actually show up in any physical way. For really the only way that you can tell for sure that you're not intersex is by having your DNA processed and seeing what it comes up with. Gender identity versus expression. So this one, it's kind of very similar. Gender identity is who you are, right? So I'm a man, I'm a transgender man. My expression is masculine, right? I express myself as a masculine man. Identity, again, identity is about who you are. Expression is about how you express yourself. Just because you're transgender doesn't necessarily mean that you're expressing that all the time. There are some people who can't feel comfortable with their family if they come out or don't want to or haven't yet, and so they won't express their gender with them, but their gender identity doesn't change based on their expression. It's still who they are. I do want to go over these terms now. Non-binary, essentially the binary part is the idea that man and woman are the only 2 categories that are allowed to be taken. Non-binary sort of gets to the idea of like, I don't really feel like either of those things. I don't particularly feel masculine. I don't particularly feel feminine, and that's okay. So non-binary is generally not associated with any particular gender. Agender, again, not associating with any particular gender. There are nuanced versions of these. If you identify as cisgender and you're ever not sure about any of these terms and somebody tells you that that's what they are, you can sort of get away with generally these are all terms that mean I don't associate with any particular gender. Or I do, but only sometimes. Gender fluid is the one where sometimes I feel masculine, sometimes I feel feminine, and that's where you'll get the expression. Some days they'll dress masculine, some days they'll dress feminine, but they're still gender fluid, or they're still non-binary. Gender non-conforming, again, not really feeling like they fit into either box, and so expressing themselves without thinking about gender. Androgynous, usually sort of an intentional, like not trying to look like either, or maybe trying to look like both. Pangender, again, a similar thing where it's like I can be any gender I want depending on the day. Gender queer, again, more about not really associating with the boxes of gender that society has sort of like brought us all up to understand. I'm going to open it up for questions really quick because I know that terms can be hard. Is there any questions about the terms or any terms that you guys have heard that you've been wanting to know about? Yes.
So for intersex, you said that most people wouldn't know if they had the extra chromosome. What would lead someone to go find out? Why would someone want to find out or need to find out?
Honestly, if it's not presenting in any way, you really wouldn't need to. But if you're doing a DNA test for, paternity or to find out if you have any preclusions for cancer or anything like that, that's a really good way to find out. Yes. CIS. So transgender comes from the Latin root trans, which means to cross over or to move. Cis comes from, I think it's actually weirdly enough the Greek for cis, which means same. So it means same gender versus changed gender, essentially. Thank you for asking. That's a good point. Anybody else?
Can you just
Yes.
explain a little bit gender fluid? I think it's really important to
Yeah.
have, because gender fluidity, that doesn't mean, it could mean daily.
Yes.
Because you're not, that's the part where I think a lot of people think, okay, well, I've changed my mind, or I don't feel, I feel like a man, I feel like a woman, I feel like a they. What gender fluidity, and we see it a lot, is sometimes it's daily. It could be twice
Yeah,
a day.
absolutely.
A little, if you don't mind talking a little bit about that, because I think that's really fascinating for people to learn about.
Absolutely, and
Okay,
I'm actually
thank
going
you.
to tell a joke that I love about a person who is gender fluid, and they were hanging out having breakfast with their father, and their father kind of looks at them and notices that they're wearing sort of men's attire, and so the father says, "So it's a Sunday?" And the kid goes, oh, yeah, I guess so. And the father goes, funny, I thought it was a Tuesday. So you guys all got that joke before I got to the punchline, and that's okay. But it is very much about just sort of, you wake up and you sort of feel how you feel. I mean, how many times, especially for women, wearing a dress versus wearing pants, right? Generally, if you're wearing a dress, you probably feel more feminine. You're feeling like you want to show that, be that kind of expression for yourself. Whereas somebody might also wake up still feeling feminine and wear a set of pants, but it's a different kind of feminine. We don't all wake up and put on the same clothes every day. And for people who are gender fluid, it's the exact same thing. Their closet is just a lot bigger. It would have to be. Doesn't make being in the closet any more comfortable, but yes.
So when you gave us those statistics earlier, are they starting to zero in to see where people may be attempting to commit suicide, actually doing bodily harm? Are they looking at which they're falling under of the different umbrellas? Because from what I hear, the most confusing for especially high school age kids to figure out is the ones under your pink umbrella.
Yeah, absolutely. And the interesting thing is that, they're labels, and ultimately, a person should choose their own label. It shouldn't be assigned to them. If somebody, Matt, I'll use you for an example. If somebody looked at you and said, no, you're a woman, I feel like you would not enjoy that very much. I feel like you enjoy being a man, right? It's who you feel comfortable being? Yeah, that's how you're comfortable. And anytime somebody is trying to tell you you can't be that thing, it makes you a little bit uncomfortable. So when you're looking at those ones, for kids, there's a lot of online resources. The Trevor Project is the one that I'm referencing with those numbers. They do a survey of high school kids, I believe, every 2 years, I want to say. I have a link actually at the end that I was going to take us to. But they are looking at, it is largely the people who are in the transgender and gender nonconforming categories that are the highest rate of suicide and or suicide attempts or serious thoughts about suicide. And also, of course, self-harm. Honestly, the toughest thing about that is that because there are a lot of options, it can be hard to know which one you sort of feel most comfortable in, which is why you have, honestly, so many, is because people are like, well, that doesn't quite feel right. And it's because it's a very new thing to not have to have a gender. Up until now, if you were a person who didn't feel like you had any particular gender, you usually would pick one and sort of roll with it. Whether that made you happy or not. But as we get more accepting and as we find that people can be you can be who you want to be, more options are coming out. And I can see why that would be confusing for kids. Is there a GSA at Cromwell now? Yes.
Correct, Dr. Macri? There is.
Yeah. And having that GSA can be a really great support service because those kids, the power of getting to talk and hang out with people who get you on that level is incredible. One of the resources at the end of the slides is this man named Tony Ferriolo, and he's absolutely fantastic. He's worked with pretty much every transgender child in Connecticut, and does group therapy and sort of leads facilitated discussions with them. And it's just a great experience for them to be able to be around other people who sort of get it, who can talk about these things with the same understanding as they would of themselves. So that's my best advice, is the GSA has to be strong. And I will say that GSAs are also usually heavily influenced by the drama clubs, just throwing that out there. You look like you have a question. Age. When can a person know?
Yeah, when is that, when you're talking about these, when is it appear or develop or?
So, going way back into Freud era, Freud believed, and to some extent he was correct, he was disproved on a lot of things, but on this I think he was right, that we associate with one of our parents usually starting by a year old, maybe 2 years old, very young. We start associating with either our mother or our father, or neither if you have two of the same parents. And that sort of shapes you and who you are by identifying with that gender. So at a very young age. When I was 4 years old, I remember telling my parents I'm a boy. And they, of course, didn't know what transgender was at the time, and they were just like, no, you're just a tomboy, like, it's fine, no worries. And I tried really, really hard to wear dresses. I tried really hard to have female friends. I tried really, really hard to like the color pink and dolls. I tried really hard to be a girl because my parents had 2 sons, and they were so excited that their 3rd child was a girl, so that they got one of each, at least. That didn't go well for them. But they understood, eventually. But for me, it was really hard to be able to say, like, this is how I feel, because I had no context of the language. I found out that I was trans. I realized that I was trans at the True Colors Conference in 2008, spring of 2008. And I found out what it was, and I was immediately like, this explains what I've been feeling my whole life. So when do they know? Very, very young. Very, very young. That's why you'll see kids transitioning as early as kindergarten and preschool, because the fact is that they know. I don't know any trans people who have stopped being trans. I'm going to keep going on the slides. There will be time for, yeah.
Gender fluidity, is that mostly with young people?
No, it continues. Yeah, I go to PFLAG meetings in Hartford, which is really great, by the way. And there are people who go to those PFLAG meetings who are in their 40s and 50s and sometimes come as one gender, sometimes as the other, and you just sort of roll with it, Going to have us continue. LGB terms. So these are about sexuality. The other was about gender. And you'll notice I have the new Philadelphia Pride flag over on the side here. And obviously it's got the classic rainbow. And then it's also got the white, pink, and blue, which are the transgender flag colors. And then you can see it doesn't show up very well on the screen, but black and brown to include the fact that our black and brown LGBT folks do exist, are important, have largely been erased despite being at the forefront of our activism. So just wanted to point that out. That's the most up-to-date one. If you want to use a pride flag for anything, I highly recommend it. It's also just really pretty. I think you all know what gay means. I think you know what lesbian means. Bisexual, I'm not going to go into those. Is everybody all right with that? Okay. Bisexual usually means 2 or more genders, and it doesn't have to be necessarily both men and women. It can be women and people who are non-binary, right? Any of those genders. Pansexual, generally any gender, is something that you can be attracted to. Asexual, not attracted sexually to people. Just in general, not interested in having sex. Just isn't their thing. Demisexual will only develop sexual attraction after having known somebody for a while, so until they get to know you, they won't have any sexual attraction to you. Sexually fluid, similar to how you can be gender fluid, you can be... I mean, a lot of people would say that, that makes you bisexual, that makes you pansexual, but ultimately, gender and sexuality don't have to be static. By any means. You can wake up as a teenager and be like, yeah, I'm bisexual. And then 10 years later be like, you know what, yeah, I'm pansexual. You can wake up and be straight for half your life and then sort of be like, you know what, I think I actually do also like the other gender. Or I think I need to shift the way that I'm thinking. There are many people who marry early in life, have kids, and then halfway down their, bringing up their kids and realizing, actually, this isn't who I am. That's why I'm not happy. Or maybe that I need to change this about myself to be happy. Romantic orientations. So there's also, I've said a lot of this is about sexual attraction. There's also romantic attraction. I don't want to get too deep into it, but romantic attraction is not always on par with sexual attraction. So there are people who are physically attracted to perchance all genders, but only romantically attracted to some. Just like there's asexual, there's also aromantic, so not feeling romantic attraction. And again, most of these you don't have to worry about because it's not you. Ultimately, this is really about just knowing that these are identities that exist that many people identify with, and that's okay, right?
Quick question on those.
Yeah.
So in wanting to be sensitive to the people that are, maybe unsure or it changes, what is your advice, if any, for those around them on how to, address them and things like that? It gets very tricky and confusing, especially for younger children.
You mean like how to tell kids about it?
No, I guess how to address how pronoun-wise.
Oh, pronoun-wise. Mm-hmm. I mean, pronouns are pretty easy. Kids, especially very young kids, will pick things up like that. And if you're a parent, you know. I'm not a parent, but I know a little bit. And generally speaking, kids are the most accepting group of people. They are still learning about the world. There's been a lot of use of the phrase, you know, no child is born racist. No child is born homophobic or transphobic or any of those things either. If you just teach them that it's normal, just say, oh yeah, this person is using male pronouns today, so he's going to use he and him and his. And then I say, you know what, this person decided that they're feeling different, they're going to use she, her, hers. The earlier you normalize it, the easier it is for them to adapt to. A lot of the times people who are, you know, adults have a harder time adapting simply because we weren't brought up with it. And we get sort of stuck in our ways. But with kids, it's very easy usually to just say, like, hey, this is how they're feeling. And if they aren't okay with it, that might be a conversation to have with the kid privately. Does that answer that a little bit?
Sort of, kind of.
Do you want to...
I guess so. On any given day, if say they're the students at school, they would have to, tell the class how they're feeling that day. I'm not quite sure what you mean.
So usually those kids, the easiest way to find out is to ask the student themselves, like, hey, like, how do you want to go about this? What's going to be easiest for you? And you can say, you know, all right, the kid is going to raise their hand and answer the first question of the day, and you'll use the correct pronouns for them as an option, and people will hopefully just follow that.
Okay.
You can also say, maybe we just use neutral pronouns in this class if they're comfortable with that. That way people don't have to worry about it changing back and forth, again, if they're comfortable with that. You can also ask if they want to be called on at all that day, because maybe their whole thing is that they're not looking to make a big deal out of it, so maybe just they're going to watch and pay attention and take notes, but not necessarily raise their hand. And that way other people might not be needing to address them. But usually the best answer really is, you know, what would make you comfortable? Because it's going to vary kid to kid. All right. And then I just put polyamory down there because that one's coming up now, where people are in multiple relationships at once. And again, not a big deal, just something to be aware of. And I want to make this really clear. No sexual orientations or genders are inherently sexual. There's been a lot of talk, the whole Don't Say Gay bill that's been going around, where there's this idea that if you teach kids about LGBT people, that it's going to corrupt them sexually. And, like, the amount to which we teach kids about heterosexual couples, like, look at any Disney movie. You're teaching kids from a very young age that being a human being who falls in love is a good thing, and there's nothing wrong with that. But you're also teaching it that it's specifically heterosexual couples. And I'm not saying Disney has to change all of their movies or that they're bad or anything. I love Disney movies. But nothing wrong with having heterosexual couples kiss on movies, on TV shows. Kids are going to see that. There's nothing wrong with having homosexual couples kiss on TV shows and movies, because it's not a sexual thing in kids' movies. If you can have a heterosexual kiss that isn't sexual, you can have a homosexual kiss that isn't sexual. And when it comes to gender, no kid is thinking to themselves, I wonder what's in that person's pants. No kid is thinking that. And if they are, please take them to a therapist. Most kids are just like, how do I address this person? They are different from what I am used to. And if your answer is a really calm, that's just a person who is a woman. That's all the context. They don't need the context. If they're wondering about what transgender people are all about, you can very easily say, they were born in one body. They were born as a boy, but they feel like they're a girl, and so now they're a girl. It's a really easy explanation for most kids. And so the misconception here tends to be that inherently you have to talk about sex when you talk about sexuality, sexual orientations, and genders, and it's like, that's really not it at all. Things you want to say that it might be offensive. Is anybody here familiar with the term microaggression? If you're not familiar with the term microaggression, I'll just do a quick summary. Basically, it's something that you say that you usually intended as a compliment, but is actually sort of a backhanded compliment that's a bit of an insult. The most common one that I use as a reference is if you're talking to somebody who is perhaps of an Asian descent, and you say, you speak English so well. There's an implication there that they are not of us, right? Their first language isn't English, and you can tell, and that makes them different, and you're pointing that out to them. And it sounds like a really nice thing, like, oh, you know, English is a hard language to learn. I'm glad that you were able to be so successful with it. But because it's really highlighting that otherness, it becomes a problem. So these are just some questions or some comments that are frequently used specifically for transgender kids and people that sound like they're really nice, but kind of have this sort of like undertone to it. I never would have guessed that you were transgender. I get this one all the time, like, oh, I never would have guessed. And I'm like, yeah, that's the point. You're not supposed to be guessing because it really shouldn't matter, right? And there's this implication here with this one that you should be able to guess that transgender people don't look normal, and we do most of the time. If you really want to come across as male or female, you should do this. Giving pointers. I assure you that people who are transgender have thought way more about performing gender than you have. The amount of thought that goes into it. Like, one of the most common examples, I think, is that, you know, backtrack. We are all constantly performing our gender. The most common way that we think about it is in the clothes that we wear, the clothes that we choose to wear every day, right? It's in the way that we style our hair. It's in the way that we carry ourselves around a building, right? Men, I'm going to step over the side just for a second. Men, when they cross their legs and they're sitting in a chair, typically cross it open like this. Whereas women sitting in a chair typically cross their legs and it's tight. I can't do it, sorry. And it's just a thing. It's not every single man and it's not every single woman, but typically that's a way that is a physical performance of gender that is different. So when you say, and like I said, most of you haven't thought about that because you don't think about performing gender because it's something that you've done all your life. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with not thinking about it. But just being aware that, like, we've thought about it a lot. We know how to be the gender that we want to be. And most of the time, we are presenting in a way that makes us happy. Nah, I don't believe it. That's just kind of, like, dismissive. Like, if it's because you don't believe in transgender people existing or the identity existing, like, that's one thing. But also just, like, the flippancy of that one. What surgeries have you had? I mentioned earlier, it's a little weird when, like, one of the first questions that people ask you is, like, so what's your medical history? Have you had surgeries? And especially, like, such an intimate surgery that they're talking about. It's just really bizarre. And it's really personal. And if you're not planning to get in bed with a person, you don't need to know. Like that. What's your real name? This one I get a lot. It's often actually referred to as a dead name because it is no longer used. If you know somebody before they transition and they change their name, you can ask them, how do you want me to refer to you when I talk about something that happened before you transitioned? So for me, I say that name no longer exists. That person never was real. It was a performance that I did, and I hated every minute of it. Not every minute of it, but, you know. I prefer to just call, he was Dusty. He was still Dusty. And again, that's a preferential thing, and it's just for when you're talking about a person in the past tense. Also good to ask about their pronouns that they want to use when they're talking about the past. Male pronouns, name Dusty all the way. But there are other people who are like, no, back then I was this other person, and we'll honor that. And it's just a difference of opinion. Again, preference. But you're so handsome or pretty. The implication being that we can't be handsome? Like, excuse me. And then, of course, I've known you for so long, do I really have to change everything like this? And this was one that I got when I first came out in high school. I had a few friends who were like, I've known you since kindergarten. I really have to, like, change. And they meant it as a joke. But to me, it was like, you've known me since kindergarten and you don't care about me enough to, like, make this small change? And ultimately, these questions just sometimes happen and you don't even think about it. The important thing is noting that transgender people don't have to respond to this, don't have to answer these questions. I'm here tonight to answer these questions, so I will. But if you, like, met me in the street, hopefully you wouldn't immediately dive in and be like, hey, so I was just wondering, what surgeries have you had? And it's just like a weird question. But anyways, a little bit about who I am. Like I said, I came out in high school. I went to Glastonbury High School, which you guys have a little bit of a history now with. The whole lawsuit thing between the track runners, the female track stars, I guess, at Glastonbury, and your female track stars here who are transgender. I actually wrote an article about it for the New York Times, not for the New York Times, that'd be cool, Hartford Courant. A little bit different. I wrote an article about it for the Hartford Courant saying how great it is that Cromwell was allowing their student athletes to transition and be on the teams that they should be on. And I'm just going to address this because it's something that a lot of people, struggle with, because it's the idea that, well, if they're transgender and it's a woman, well, they've still got the testosterone and the hormones and that sort of thing. And I always think to that, if it's about hormones, let's stop separating teams based on gender and separate teams based on hormones. Everybody gets tested every week or every month or every season, whatever it is. And then if your testosterone levels are under this, you're on one team. If your testosterone levels are over that, you're on the other team. And I can't think of anybody who would actually do that, because it's not about hormones. It's about being transgender and being transphobic. Like I said, I do want to note that you guys are here pretty late already. So I'm going to skip some of this. I'll talk a little bit about my experience as a teacher. My first year teaching, like I said, I did my student teaching here. I did my first year of teaching in Avon, and I had a really great experience. My principal was super understanding. He himself was actually gay and was openly so. And at one point in the year, we'd been having some issues with bullying. And so he decided he was going to tell students his story to try and inspire them to recognize when bullying is happening and do better. It was really, really powerful, and I took the next day for all of my classes, and I said, I'm going to do it too. And I came out to all of my students that way. And word got out, and it got published in the Hartford Courant, which was pretty cool. And I had student after student coming to me saying, I'm so glad that you told everybody, because this makes me feel better about who I am. And not even just the trans kids, just any of the kids who felt a little bit different, any of the kids who knew what it was like for their friends who were transgender or who were gay. Being able to have somebody visible, somebody in a normal job who is part of this community was really powerful. I also teach at Central Connecticut State University. I teach Introduction to Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies. And one of the things that I talk about is if you can't see it, you can't be it. If you don't see somebody like you doing good things, doing normal things, you kind of get this impression that that's not meant for you. And of course, success is meant for everybody. Later, I went to Canton. I taught at Canton for a couple of years. Again, I didn't come out, but I also wasn't quiet about it. I had already come out. There was an article about me in the paper. I had done a TED Talk at that point. And I was like, if students Google me, they will know everything that they need to know about me, and I'm okay with that. And I did have students come up to me, and they were like, so is it true? Like, are you transgender? And I was like, yeah. And they were like, oh, okay, cool. And what was interesting is at Canton, we didn't have... I think we had one person of color who was an adult at that school who was the choice program coordinator. And we had a number of choice students. And once those students found out that I was transgender, they came to my classroom during their lunch every day. We had the same lunch. And like 6 or 7 of them would come and hang out in my classroom. Because they know that, yeah, I'm not black, but I am a minority. I've been under that stress. And having somebody who gets that was really important to them. Which just goes to show, again, representation is super important. So a few common questions that I get from boards, from teachers. The first one, when did you know you were trans? You actually did ask that already, one. I knew by the time I was 5 years old, had I had the language, I would have been able to express it, because I was able to say, I'm a boy. But didn't have the word transgender, didn't have that knowledge. So you'll find kids coming out earlier and earlier because now that language is getting normalized. How young can you... Sort of the same question. What bathroom do I use? I use the men's room, but my comment on this is always like... When you go into the bathroom... I don't know if everybody else does this, but I think everybody else does this. When you go into the bathroom, you do not make eye contact. You do not make any sort of like don't touch anybody. If you can avoid it, you don't even brush next to them. You go to the bathroom, you go to the stall, or whatever it is. You use it. You hopefully wash your hands, and you leave. And at no point in there are you there for socialization of any kind. Hopefully. It's a little bit different if you go in there with a friend, obviously, but if you're just going to use the bathroom, there's really no reason for it to matter who's in the bathroom as long as everybody's following the same bathroom protocol. That is standard. That being said, obviously we do have in most of society gendered bathrooms, and it could be really uncomfortable for some people to go into the bathroom that they're assigned. Obviously, in North Carolina, there's the bathroom bill that means that people like me, who were born female, have to use the female bathroom. And I don't know about the women in here, but I feel like it might be uncomfortable for a woman to walk into a bathroom and see me using it. I feel like that's more awkward. But that's just how I think about it, I guess. How did my family react? My parents were incredibly supportive. They've always been very supportive. They're actually quite wonderful. My mom is a teacher. My dad works with CABE, which I'm sure you all are familiar with probably. He's the executive director over there, which is, it's sort of become education is the family business. Again, I get that question a lot. What surgeries have I had? And I'm actually not going to talk about that one. I just put it up there because I want to address that. Everybody's probably wondering it. Have I ever regretted my transition? No. No. There was one time, and it was just because I was frustrated because my suit didn't fit right. Aren't you worried about what people will think? Yes, constantly, all the time. Every time I do a presentation, I always wonder to myself, like, what if this is a trap? What if this is, somebody set this up, they found out who I am, and they thought to themselves, if I set it up at the right place, if I handle it the right way, I can get him there, and then I can hurt him. And that is something that I constantly worry of. And is anybody here familiar, I'm trying to go as fast as I can, familiar with the movie Boys Don't Cry? Absolutely amazing movie, and for many, many, many years, it was the only movie that I had where there was a transgender man as the main character. Hilary Swank did a phenomenal job, deserved the Oscar 100%. Wonderful film. If you haven't watched it, please do. There is graphic violence, so be aware of that before you get into it. It's based on a true story, and basically, spoiler alert, the transgender guy gets shot in the head at the end, and that was the only movie I had that had somebody like me in it. So when we talk about representation, the effect that had on me, there's no way I thought that I would make it to 30. There was no way. I thought I would die by 18. I thought that if not, I would probably kill myself before I graduated college. And for a very long time, that's what I thought was going to happen to me, because it was the only representation that I had. So yeah, I am constantly worried about what people are going to think and how they're going to react. And then, of course, people are always like, but your hormones can affect your brain. And I'm like, yeah, so can, Tylenol. So the questions about, policy now more, bathrooms, locker rooms, do the next one, and that one, yep. Overnight field trips. Generally speaking, first of all, the easiest way that you're going to have is ask the kid if they have a preference. If they don't have a preference, locker rooms, they use the one, again, that they choose. Generally, that means that if it's a trans male kid, they're going to use the men's room. If it's a trans woman, she's going to use the women's room. If she or he feels uncomfortable, it is good to have a third option available, either a coach's room, a faculty bathroom, or a nurse's bathroom, or something like that. But you cannot tell that kid that they're not allowed to use the bathroom that makes them feel comfortable. And the question I always get after that is, well, what if other kids feel uncomfortable having that kid in there? And ultimately, their discomfort is not the same as the trans kid's safety, because it's the safety of them and their mental health. It's the safety of them being able to be who they are. And again, bathrooms are not a place for socialization. You go in, you don't pay attention to anybody else, and you get out. Ultimately, that's what it comes down to. And overnight field trips, again, you have to be careful, but ask the kid what they want. Most of the time, when you do overnight field trips, at least when I was in school and when I was a teacher, the kids chose their roommates, and usually it was based on gender. But ultimately, I went on a trip when I was transgender in high school, and I was like, I feel comfortable with these 3 female friends, so we're going to share a room. And those 3 female friends were comfortable with it, and it worked. When a student transitions mid-year, again, ask the student. I've had instances where a student wanted a letter sent out to the whole school, and they managed to do it, and they made it super easy. So all of the faculty knew, students knew, even I think parents knew, and it was just a really simple way to say, hey, this is going to be a thing that your kid will experience, and the school is supporting it. And there are other ways as well. They can just quietly do it. I did it pretty quietly. I just told I told my teachers and I told my friends, and I came out during a presentation. When a student says that they're uncomfortable sharing with a bathroom or a locker room with a transgender student, that student who is uncomfortable, you can offer them the other bathroom as well. They can be offered the coach's bathroom. They can be offered the nurse's bathroom. But you can't force a transgender student to use a different bathroom. It has to be by choice. When is it acceptable to contact the parents? This has been a big question for kids who have not come out to their parents yet. And the answer is you cannot out a student to their parents because it could create an unsafe situation at home. It's a really sad reality, but it is the reality that we live in. Outing a student is never acceptable. Ask the student's permission first. And then if the parent of a non-transgender student is uncomfortable or angry that their student has to deal with a transgender student, you can offer to separate them and make sure that they're not in any classes together. You can again offer the alternate bathroom for their kid, but again, that parent does not get to dictate what another student does. And when I say the word other, I want to make sure everybody knows it is a verb, and it's basically when you take somebody and you make them separate from the group, and therefore discriminate against them for that reason. Reasons why we need to support these students. I don't think that anybody here doesn't want to support the students, but just be aware they may not have come out yet. Defend them against everybody. Parents, teachers, administrators, board members, obviously their peers, but those 4 groups of adults, some adults either have their own biases or are just not educated on the subject. So it's important to recognize that. I have been bullied by other teachers. I have been bullied by administrators for being trans. It happens, and it's important to be aware of that. Respect them and use the pronouns they ask you to use. And again, if they're feeling like if they are gender fluid, you can ask them every day. There are places that make like pins. I think actually the CCSU LGBT Center, which I work with, has pins that have he, him, she, her, they, them, ask me, like little pins that they could wear if they wanted to and if they felt comfortable. And then, of course, help their peers be empathetic. When I was in a history class or a psychology class, I answered a question. The teacher asked another kid in the front, hey, what do you think about what he said? And the student goes, he who? And the teacher goes, him. And he points at me. And the student looks back at me and goes, she's not a him. And the teacher goes, yes, he is. I think he would know better than you. And it stopped it immediately. No further comment from the student. It took 3 seconds. And no more commentary, no more thoughts of bullying from that student. Just, all right, whatever, I guess I got to be on board with this. Teachers are really powerful. And then the last thing, these are just some resources. PFLAG, GLSEN, HRC, GLAD, they're huge national organizations. The Trevor Project is really important. I won't get into it now, but if you go on the Trevor Project's website, you can find all the facts that I was giving you guys at the beginning. Tony Ferriolo, who I mentioned, excellent with trans kids, has worked with basically every trans kid in Connecticut, including me. And of course, my website there, genderlyspeaking.com. Thank you guys so much. Time for questions now, if you would like.
Are there any questions from the board or town council? You did a great job. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Really
Yeah.
appreciate it. Also,
Sorry, that was a little bit rushed there. I was trying to.
no, you were amazing. And this is Matt Brown. I just want to introduce him as well,
So,
Chair of the LGBTQ
Yes,
plus
so I just want to
committee.
say thank you, everyone. Thank you, Dusky, for the training today, and thank you for Selena and the entire Board of Ed and the town council members who were able to attend today. Again, I am one of the co-chairs of the Cromwell LGBTQ committee. We're going to be continuing to see more in the coming months for our Cromwell Spring into Pride events that are going to be culminating in an event in June. Selena's going to be handing out just a quick little one-pager where you can follow our Facebook page, and also we have a Cromwell Cares signs that we're selling, like lawn signs in town as well, which do use the flag that Dusty shared as well, so we're ready to go there too. But if you have any questions here, I'll be hanging out too. But thank you guys so much. I know this was a jam-packed night. I know I'm going run to another meeting too, but thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing your story again, Dusty. We really appreciate it.
Of course, thank you guys for listening.
Okay. With that, is there a motion to adjourn? Dipty, second. Kellyanne? All in favor? Opposed, abstentions?